Hey everybody, welcome back to our Kicks Over Coffee digital transformation series. This is a special series where we're talking about digital transformations as we come out of the COVID pandemic. Obviously, there was, I think we all know, before the pandemic, the need for digital transformation. The pandemic hit, and there was no longer, a question that we needed it. And then as we come out of this kind of pandemic, where are we headed with digital transformation? And the series kind of explores where we're at and where we're headed, and providing some depth to things, because I think sometimes we lack that depth. Obviously, before this session, we had a great session with Lasts with Bill Tibbett, who was formerly with Jones and Vining, and then with Nike for many years doing their digital transformation. So if you didn't catch that, please go back and catch that. And then after this series, we're going to be focusing a lot more on retail and merchandisation and what's happening in that space. So we're trying to cover all the different facets of digital transformation. And of course, this series is powered by, or I should say, caffeinated by Romans CAD, which is a software company that's helping folks digitize their entire operations. I'm excited today to have Jean-Marc Petitboy join us. He was a principal with strategies in Romans CAD, and with Chris Lovedare, who formerly is with Wolverine Worldwide, who help facilitate their digital transformations. And so I'm going to start with Chris. It's great to see you again. I hope you're doing well. One of the things that we want to cover in this session especially is how we optimize operations in this digital age. Unfortunately, we still see a lot of companies using Excel and email and filling out bombs and sending it over, and then all of a sudden, the last minute, making adjustments, and then all of a sudden, so we see all this time wasting, and the idea of Zoom calls and Excel as a digital transformation isn't really digital transformation. So perhaps you can talk a little bit about that operation that you saw when you were working at Wolverine Worldwide, and even now as you work with companies in your role. But what is the synchronization importance across multiple departments by using Roman CADs and other tools? How do you see that playing out, and then the importance of just optimizing that as a time suck for our development?
Sure. Thanks, Andy. Thanks for having me on your show. If you go back through history, we used to chisel on a piece of rock, and then someone invented telex machines, and then someone invented fax machines, and then we got email, and it's just getting faster and faster and faster as to all the things that you can do within making footwear. And one of the biggest things today is having the ability to understand, A, what do you want your footwear to look like? And B, more importantly these days, is how much is that going to cost? And using the old Excel spreadsheet, for example, you're dealing with data that's usually out of date because prices change constantly. And you're employing someone to update that information all the time. So a supplier will give you, for example, this leather's going up 40 cents a square foot. Someone has to communicate that. Someone then has to put that into your Excel spreadsheet, and then you have to recalculate your cost of the shoe. Having the ability to have the suppliers enter directly into a database that automatically calculates what the new FOB is going to be based off the new material pricing, gives you an instant update as to what that new material is going to be. The other thing is, within an Excel spreadsheet, it's very difficult to work out exactly how much material you're actually using, because again, someone puts a decimal place in the wrong area and you're in trouble. Whereas if you're using a digital file format that understands the intricacies of engineering, flattening, duty data, that kind of stuff, it's a lot more accurate so that you can make more informed decisions earlier in the process before you even go to the factory. Did that answer your question? Or
Yeah, I think you did, because I think it's one of these things where I think when you look at something like Romans CAD, and we had talked about it in previous sessions, there was a reason why we started with the last, and pattern making with footwear. I think if we were doing an apparel series, it would be a completely different conversation. But sometimes, unfortunately, in the past, we started with design, and that's not really for footwear where the return on investment is. It's in the pattern making and understanding what you were saying. The bill of materials is not just the square footage of the leather, but it's actually the patterns of the leather and understanding the different components of it. And I think, maybe you can describe using Roman's CAD at Wolverine Worldwide to kind of better understand that cost analysis, because it is, I mean, the biggest thing we have is obviously is supply chain cost right now and inflation. And every C-suite executive is asking every employee, like, how do we cut cost anywhere, right? So maybe you can talk a little bit about that too, a little bit deeper.
Sure. So if you have a virtual prototype, you can look at a design, you can get all the decision makers involved to say, yeah, this is what we want. You can then go to the next level and look at, okay, what does the pattern engineering look like by doing a quick flattening? And with some knowledge of footwear making, understand that if you move the toe cap back 2 millimeters, for example, you can change the duty rate on a shoe without getting anyone involved, without getting factories involved, without remaking pattern engineering. You can immediately go from 22% duty down to a 15% duty, depending on what country you're in. So having that ability to dial in to the actual footwear itself before you go ahead and make shoes gives you a good advantage over your competitors who are using Excel spreadsheets and are totally dependent on believing what the factory's telling them, for want of a better word. I mean, Wolverine, we did use the term one version of the truth quite a lot. And that's really important when you're looking at finance.
That's very interesting. That's very, because it's that old Russian phrase, trust but verify, that was used a lot during the Cold War of like, we trust our factory partners, but at the same time, when you get into an inflationary environment where every penny counts, you better know who's counting the pennies, which side. Jean-Marc, when we talk about, what's happened during COVID and people trying to communicate remotely, like we were talking about this years before it ever happened. But Zoom saw, like, we're doing these series on Zoom, and it's great to have everybody different remote, but there's only so much you can do visually when you're holding up a shoe and you're talking about it versus the data and making sure that all the teams are synchronizing across that, not just on the call looking at the aesthetic, but we're talking about the patterns and the costing and all that. So maybe you can talk a little bit about what you've seen through COVID and then what you see coming out with teams synchronizing.
Yeah, exactly. It just basically it's about getting the workflow between all the stakeholders in sync. Okay. Previously you did. Next week we're going to talk about retail, but at the end of the day, everything is connected. You buy on retail, but if you don't have the right measurement based on a library of last, or if you don't study your customer base, now today we're seeing more and more people doing pre-marketing, study based on measurement of people. Then you can report that directly to production, to the last making, to the flattening. So basically, it's about connecting the dots between. Today, we have a new concept about material exchange, library of material. We can use that. I mean, because between the material library and your ERP system, there is a big gap. That's what we're covering. There, you have to do the design. You have to transform this crude information into actionable action. And pre-costing for that matter. That's where the Romans CAD platform shines. Because it will give you the key indicators you need to perform a design and development effort in a dynamic and modern methodology. There is no other way. Obviously, the perfect situation will be to have the design and the factory all connected. We've been talking about that for the last 20 years. I don't think already happening in the footwear industry, but never give up on a good thing, as they say, you know. But at least if we can, and as you said, because of inflation, because of interest rate increasing, then you have to, okay, you trust the factory, but within reason, okay, and maybe if you obviously have the control of what they tell you, yeah, it's a kind of thing financial people are going to be happy to see, okay? And that's where we can help with Roman Cat, really transforming the raw data into data that you can make decision with, like pre-costing, bill of material, smart bill of material. Needless to speak about the fact that when we're talking about, just to anticipate about what you're going to tell next week, but sending all this virtual model to an e-commerce for your salespeople, you know, instead of having salespeople carrying a physical sample. Now you can do that completely on the web virtually, you know, changing color, doing colorways. Another thing we can do now, you know, we are talking, I know you're very involved in sustainability, okay? Now we can, based on data that sustainability database will provide, will provide sustainability index versus cost, okay, all together. Okay, that type of information could be not only interesting for the production, but also for the consumer, you know. So they want to feel good, but sometimes feel good as a cost. And you have to explain that to people and show them that, okay, we're using a sustainable material. That's why, okay, explain all the detail. And the only way we can do that, because the amount of data is so, it's to completely integrate the workflow, you know, do that in a dynamic manner, regardless location, okay? And that's the way that the footwear industry should pursue.
Yeah. Chris, I'll go back to you because I want to talk a little bit too about speed to market issues. It seems to be the other thing, right? The cost is a huge issue, but also just speed to market. Traditional systems, when you're like lining up various SKUs, obviously it takes a long time to sample those out and get that lined up and do line reviews and all that. When you use Roman Cat at Wolverine, what was the difference in terms of being able to do multiple lines and make multiple decisions? Like what's the time difference and I guess the correct decision difference when you're doing those in something like digital versus the traditional way?
If you look at the typical traditional methodology of creating new lines of product, you would do between 2 and 4 seasons a year. Okay, so you have all your designers working like crazy, doing the first batch of footwear design. Then all of that information gets put into Excel spreadsheets and sent over to a factory to get your first prototypes back. And then you get your whole line back again. And then you start making revisions on those, sending them back to the factory. You know, you're talking months and months and months of the time frame here before you even seen a shoe that remotely looks like what the design intent was. What I noticed, not only at Wolverine, but at other companies as well, is having the ability to do, I'd call it small batch design work, if you will, splitting that spring, summer, for example, over 8, 10, 12 different introduction times. So your designers are working on this product, and then they move on to this product, and they move on to this product, as opposed to doing the whole line. So that this design element here is now gone over into the costing aspect of it, while the designers are freed up to start working on the next introduction. You know, and there's a lot of companies doing a really good job at that, of introducing new product every 60, 90 days, which is an amazing speed to market. Having the digital format to be able to do that, you can also get information back from your consumer. You know, I mean, everybody has a database of consumers that they like, that they listen to, the trend makers, and they can send them the digital information and say, hey, what do you think about these and these colorways? And then predetermine what colors are going to introduce when, based off feedback from those trend makers, to get the right product before it even gets to the factory, before anything else happens. So that as you are telling the factory, this is what I want, you are also telling the supplier, this is the color of material that we want to use, so that they're working in tandem, as opposed to the old way of dumping information at the manufacturing level, who then has to dump the information to the supplier level, and a lot of it all at once. This becomes a much more continual process throughout the whole year.
Let me ask you a question, and you can tell me if I'm right or wrong, but
You're wrong.
probably. That's why I'm asking.
Yeah.
Traditional way, I update an Excel spreadsheet, I email it out, somebody gets it, it's already outdated, somebody uses an old version of the spreadsheet that I sent out, they're making decisions off of that. All of a sudden it goes 2 weeks down the line, and then somebody gets it and catches it, and we've got a problem to deal with. With Romans CAD, it seems like someone updates the data set, and then everybody across the teams can see that update and make the right decision. Is that the difference?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay. Because I think that's an important thing to note of when we talk about correct decisions and time, is having a system where that data point's updated, everybody knows it's updated. You don't get down the line to where you have to make a decision. And I thought it was interesting when we were talking about the duty rate. Obviously, at FDRA, we deal a lot with duty, with fighting duty rates and trying to help people understand that there's 436 different ways to classify footwear coming into the US, and there are tips and ways that you can change patterns or change materials in order to reduce that duty rate. I'm interested to know a little bit. Yeah, and Jean-Marc, you can speak to this too, but how does that work within the system of understanding that? Is it material composition that you're looking at and the patterns? Is that what it is? Jean-Marc?
Okay. No, yes. But one of the things that people should understand is where Roman Sky makes a difference is when you do the CAD and you have the database, everything, all CAD modification will modify your data. So that's one of the key features that that's why then you can have a continuous workflow. Okay, because obviously before you get the finished product, people will go back and forth and then make a CAD change, a design change, the line, okay, yeah, I prefer this design. Boom, all your consumption, all your reports, all your pre-costing, and all the pattern. This change goes through all the different steps and all up to the ERP, because or your PLM, because after you finished, you push that data to your PLM. Bingo, it's all updated. They want to change, you can change the design of all the data. All the data is immediately updated in real time.
And more,
if you
and more
if you want to do that, sorry.
And more accurately, if you look at just duty alone, the old method was to cut a shoe up into the different pieces, use a pantograph to work out what the actual area was. Okay. If again, it's human error to make changes and make little bits here and there. And if you're within 1% of hitting your duty rate, you could find that as you get actual shoe sent in to get the duty clarified at the duty people, that you were wrong, and that you now have shoes where you're not making as much money as you hoped you were going to make. Whereas if you're doing it digitally, it's a lot more accurate, a lot more accurate.
Yeah, that's a great point. Today on this session, what we covered a little bit was around synchronizing the workflow across multiple teams. And I think Jean-Marc said that really well. And so did Chris, around you update one piece of data and it flows across that whole picture so that the teams can make right decisions in real time versus someone controlling the Excel spreadsheet, getting input, updating, in this environment of inflation.
But more
and
important,
speed
you
to market.
modify the CAD. That means you modify the real shoe.
Right.
You know, you modify the real shoe based on the real last measurement, based on, you know, you're modifying real data.
Right. And it's synchronizing across. So I think that's the difference when we talk about like digital transformation of Zoom and Excel and software versus something like Roman's CAD, where it actually synchronizes and does it automatically for you to help you make those better decisions. I also thought it was really interesting to discuss the duty and the pattern making, about how that can help you make decisions around that. And realistically, just the multifaceted way in which you can, Chris also pointed out, you can get feedback from the consumer, feed that into that system and update it. And I guess as we exit this out, I'm wondering what the future looks like. Is the future something where we have computers that can take that data and feedback and start to help make new designs or make new patterns based on what the consumer feedback is, almost like an AI system? Is that, you know, maybe it's 10 years in the future, but are we getting to that point to where we can, humans as ourselves can better manage the system, but the systems may start to operate much more efficiently on their own?
What you're talking about is machine learning.
Yes.
And there are some stuff out there that will help you do that, certainly from a color perspective. As if you look at your previous sales over the past 10 years and you put that information into machine learning, you will notice that this particular kind of color blocking, for example, will help you sell more shoes because your customer base historically has bought more of that kind of product, as opposed to someone looking at the product from 10 years ago and saying, why did this sell so well? Was it the price? Was it the fit? Was it the color? You know, yeah, and you can't capture that data from 10 years ago. And only by having digital information at the beginning of the process and having historical data that you build up over time can you actually do that and have something like machine learning help you plan your line out better.
And as we exit, Jean-Marc, we always talk about the future of both regulation and the consumers wanting to know, and you touched on this really quickly, but as we exit, that sustainability data. And I think, you know, we talked about how Roman's CAD is building in a system that could actually have that list where you could use it for the consumer or to make better decisions. And maybe in 1 minute or less, if you can, just maybe describe what that future looks like really quickly again.
Yeah, exactly. It's trying to get the data from the consumer, and, you know, and going through all the different workflow or making, manufacturing, designing, manufacturing the footwear. I think one of the bigger change I would like to see is integration with the factory. I think that could be that could be an industry future. We are working with one of the shoe manufacturer in the US on doing that. You know, getting the pattern directly to the stitching machine. That's with the industry 4.0. That's on the manufacturing side. What's happening with the metaverse in the future? You know, sending a different 3D model, like how we can interact with this new space. You know, a lot of things are going to change. But what I could say, we are ready, because once again, we are working on the 3D model, on the real dimension, on the real model. So, I mean, regardless of what's happening, we'll be ready to send this model, because the physical model has a digital representation. Okay, and the next change will be, what are we going to do with this digital representation, exact representation, and precise.
Yeah, and I think that's the thing too, is the accuracy of your sustainability data, because you have all that modeling in there. There's not assumptions based on purchasing price and then doing it, but you actually have a model of the shoe. You actually have the patterns. You have the processes built in, so you actually get the accurate information out, which is extremely important to consumers and to companies as they increasingly start to report ESG. So, gentlemen, fascinating conversation. Diving a little bit deeper into how digital software Roman's CAD can synchronize across multiple teams, give line of sight into cost, increase speed to market accurately, as well as kind of a look at the future, a little bit of what the systems can do if you have it set up properly, to help you make better decisions down the road and more sustainable decisions about what you're doing. So thanks, guys, again. Thank you for watching this episode. I'll remind you, please go back and watch the previous one with Bill and Jean-Pierre on last making and the importance of a last library as a start. This was really focused on kind of synchronizing team, but also the importance of pattern making with footwear and all of that. And then in the coming episodes that we'll launch soon, it will focus more on retail and merchandising and consumers, and maybe a little bit on the metaverse and NFTs. We'll see around that as well. But again, thanks to Roman Cads for caffeinating this series as a look of what digital transformation is looking like as we come out of the pandemic. Again, thanks to Chris and Jean-Marc. And until next time, keep drinking coffee, keep digital transforming. Thank you.
Okay, bye-bye.